Hello, everybody.
Hey.
Welcome back to the
Downlore.
I'm Natalie.
I'm Claudia.
And we're back again on God's beautiful internet on this gorgeous, gorgeous day to talk about the Stolen Heir Duology.
Yep. So if you were here last time, our most recent episode, we talked about the Cruel Prince, the Wicked King, Queen of Nothing, Holly Black's Folk of the Air trilogy. And this is her newest release, The Prisoner's Throne, the second in the Stolen Heir Duology. Came out earlier in March. So we cranked through the Folk of the Air and then this duology to get this to you as soon as possible because that's how much we care about you, the reader.
For context, the Prisoner's Throne came out on March 5th, and the day that we were recording this is March 9th. So we really spent every waking moment outside. I mean, same thing we did for Flame and Shadow.
I mean, this is kind of how we live our lives at this point. It is every waking moment we are invested in a book, and you like go down the rabbit hole and you stay there for a long time.
Listen, all I'm saying is, why would I go out to dinner and spend $27 on a salad when I could just sit right here, eat some popcorn, and escape to another world?
Someone sent me a thing on Instagram, and people send me the same things all the time because my personal brand is I do nothing but read. And so I've received this multiple times, and it is like, how wild is it that like books are just ink on paper and you just stare at it for hours on end and hallucinate vividly.
Yes.
And like that hits.
That is a
so
Hall of Fame
hard.
tweet. That is a Hall of Fame tweet.
So Hall of Fame. Like I want that framed and put up in my future house with the library of books I am going to eventually own, with the rich husband I don't have yet who's going to have to fund all of the special edition, beautiful, sprayed edge versions of books I am going to need.
And maybe he's also an acts of service husband and builds you the shelves himself.
That would be oof.
Personally, I just feel like that hits even harder than him paying for someone else to build your library for you.
So true.
But that's just me.
So let's talk about some other men that don't exist.
Right.
But actually,
our favorite activity. But first we will talk about a man that maybe exists, at least a person with an Instagram account.
Yes. So last time we podcasted, we had a little bit of an intro where we were talking about ACOTAR, fantasy in general, and just people's knee-jerk reaction to kind of shit on fantasy that women like. And we posted this reel where we basically said that if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, you'll probably like ACOTAR. And we got, in response, a comment that was a little mini paragraph long.
To put it briefly, it was a textbook definition of mansplaining. And I do want to say, first of all, we're not going to be disclosing the username of this person to platform them further. Second of all, I do realize that it would be hypocritical for me to say, oh, he took time out of his day to write this paragraph, when we're taking time out of our podcast recording session to talk about the paragraph that he wrote. However, I'm going to do this just once because it struck a nerve. This man, by writing what he wrote, proved the point that we were trying to make. This man came into our comments section and said, well, then if you're saying that ACOTAR is like Game of Thrones, then is it really high fantasy? Because Game of Thrones isn't high fantasy, it's feudal fantasy. And it's more about the political intrigue and what's going on between the political parties rather than the magical creatures and magic everywhere.
Like, sir, first and foremost, the internet is unserious, and we never said Game of Thrones and ACOTAR were the same. We literally said, if you like Game of Thrones, you will probably find enjoyment with ACOTAR as well. And if you're discrediting it before even giving it a shot, then you're passing judgment with some flawed preconceived notions that we're just trying to get you to like put aside and think about a little bit differently. And him coming into the comments and just giving us this mini lecture, that is exactly the judgment and the small-mindedness that we are just trying to dispel.
I'd also like to add that he was incorrect.
There's that too.
I did have to look it up just to prove that I'm not hallucinating. But there were 0 Google search results for feudal fantasy. That is not a subgenre that exists in the zeitgeist of the fantasy world. Yes, there are fantasies for sure that take place in a sort of feudal environment. Throne of Glass even potentially being considered as one of those. But just the very nature of Game of Thrones, including dragons and kingdoms and political intrigue, that classifies it as high fantasy. That's what high fantasy is. It is a fantasy that has 0 elements of the real world.
Yeah. And we're not out here to like nitpick and take fantasy and like put everything into little boxes and tell you like what's what and what you should like and what you shouldn't. We're here to tell you that there is so much out there for people to enjoy, and it's just small-minded, and frankly you're robbing yourself of joy if you discredit something without giving it a chance because you're caught up in the technicalities.
Exactly. And because this man decided to take the technical angle with a technicality that has no basis at all, that told me, okay, well then you are literally just saying this. You're making stuff up in order to discredit ACOTAR, in order to discredit and do the very thing that we were trying to get at, which is people, generally speaking, coming at these franchises and worlds and fantastical stories that women enjoy and trying to rip them down and make them seem not as serious or stupid or a waste of time compared to these other things when there's literally no legs to stand on in that department. I also want to add, I feel like a lot of and we also posted a reel about this, a lot of the bad name that these fantasy series that women love get is because of the romance aspect and the smut. As if Game of Thrones doesn't have sex scenes.
I know, please be serious.
And like, there's some incestual stuff going on there. Like, I'm so sorry, but if you cannot hate on Feyre and Rhysand's love story, although I will hate on it slightly because I am a little bit weirded out about the 19-year-old girl and 500-year-old man of it all. It freaks me out. I'm gonna just say that. You can't hate on that and then be all over Game of Thrones. It pisses me off to no end, and I just wanted to draw a line in the sand. Mm-hmm. We won't tolerate any mansplaining, especially when the mansplaining
is proving our point.
1, and 2 is literally not even factually correct.
Yeah. And also, on the one hand, it's like discrediting things that women like. That's part of it. But the sad thing is that at the same time, people who are thinking that way are depriving themselves of content that they could be enjoying because women like it. Like, that is so silly. That is so silly.
About, like, why is that? And truthfully, it's just... it's obviously toxic masculinity. That's the basis for most of these problems. But I feel like men feel the need, and men and pick-me girls feel the need to just completely tear down things that women generally enjoy in order to make the thing that men enjoy that's pretty much the same thing look better, so that when men say they like this one thing but they don't like this other thing, they look like they have this masculine, nuanced view of things, and that if they like this thing that's for girls, that they're less of a man because of it.
It's silly. Also, in the amount of time it took this person to make up their facts and then type it out and post it, he could have solved Amarantha's riddle, okay? He could have solved Amarantha's riddle and felt equally as smart. Sitting there reading it and being like,
oh, the answer's love.
Yeah. What a serotonin boost that was. You know how smart I felt when I realized that? Really freaking smart. And I'm sure that that's the kick that people get out of like posting comments of this nature. because they want to feel superior. You want to feel superior, go read a fantasy novel and try to figure out the plot twist before you get to the end. Natalie does it all the freaking time, and she texts me when she sees things coming and I've already read it, and I genuinely am always floored because I very rarely guess what's coming. I feel like I'm in it too much to like be looking around. But Natalie reads from like a slightly different like bird's eye view, I feel like, at all times that I just completely forget about. And like those kinds of moments, like guessing what's gonna happen, that I'm sure that gives you so much joy.
Oh my god, it's a blast. It's my favorite part. I love trying to figure out where the author's taking me before we get there.
Yeah, you're like, I'm sorry, I'm a genius for guessing this. So you want to feel like a genius, go read fantasy and let yourself go along for the ride and try to figure out what's happening.
Fun. Just have fun. Speaking of solving riddles in fantasy, that's a perfect segue into our topic for today, which is the Stolen Heir Duology, of which this time around, the both of us were able to guess the plot twist of the first book before it happened.
Yep. And like I said, I never guess these things. I felt like Natalie. I felt like Natalie for a good 30 seconds. I was like, I saw this coming and I texted her. I was like, is this what it feels like? Is this how you feel every time you read and you guess this stuff?
It's exhilarating.
I was vibrating on a different plane of existence. It was great.
Yeah.
Before we get to the Stolen Heir, since we were just talking about ACOTAR and Game of Thrones,
right? Yes,
I do think we owe it to the girlies. We owe it to the people to do a little fan service and let you guys know that our next episode is going to be all about ACOTAR. It is not going to be like a run through of the plot because there's so much of it. It's just going to be Natalie and I fangirling about ACOTAR, to be completely honest.
Yeah, there's no need for anyone else to do a plot recap or anything of that
nature.
Yeah,
you want a plot recap, you got wikis, you got so many YouTube videos, so many girlies have done that. But coming off of the heels of, this mansplaining comment and just knowing that ACOTAR is such a quintessential part of everybody's fantasy journey, and we have a lot of friends who are reading it either for the first time now or like into the series and are navigating their way through Sarah J. Maas, it would feel incomplete if we had all of our Crescent City content up and then didn't have our foundational ACOTAR episode.
ACOTAR has become, over the last few years, especially with the rise of book talk, like the gold standard for this genre. And as a podcast dedicated to unpacking the lore in these fantasy series, it would behoove us to give our take on the ACOTAR series. And I feel a little inspired by this mansplaining comment that when we talk about it, I do want to get into the political intrigue of it all a little bit.
Yeah, yes. What is it that makes ACOTAR the gateway drug that gets us back into fantasy? It's either that or Fourth Wing is what I've noticed with the girlies who are getting back into it.
If you like Fourth Wing, you like ACOTAR and vice versa.
Right.
It's very rare to encounter someone that liked one and not.
Yeah.
If you hated one, you probably hate the other and vice versa.
So anyway, that's what's coming in our next episode. So just stay tuned for that. We will always talk about ACOTAR. And frankly, if you've noticed anything about our previous episodes, it's that we kind of already gauge our current read against ACOTAR. And so like that is our point. It's like it is the gold standard of comparison. So we're gonna do a deep dive into just that and give the people what they want.
A good old Serviana Grande. Okay.
All right, back to the Stolen Heir.
Back to the Stolen Heir. So we're gonna give you our 5 W's of this series, as we do with all of our series. It's a duology, not a series. Although when we get to the Prisoner's Throne, they did leave us off with the potential of another book. Not necessarily in this series. This duology was very complete in the like love story, character development arc of the two main characters, Ren and Oak. But there might be more Jude and Carden Elfhame content to come.
Yes,
from Holly Black.
We'll get into that as kind of like our crack theory o'clock segment.
Yeah. Yep.
So the Who, our two main characters in this duology, Oak and Ren, or Surin, depending on how familiar you are to her. Oak and Surin were kids in the Cruel Prince Folk of the Air trilogy. They were like 7 years old. Adorable. We love. And now, fast forward about a decade, they are teenagers, and this is their story, their quests, their romance arc, etc. So it's a nice big time jump.
Mm-hmm.
And we are watching them at the same age as Jude and Cardan were in The Cruel Prince. So let's start with Oak.
Yeah, let's start with Oak. So, as Claudia just said, Oak was 7 in the Cruel Prince trilogy, and now he's 17. He's kind of set up to be this, like, charming, cute guy with bumbling fool energy, but, like, he's also been raised in the court, so he's a little bit of a schemer, is what we're led to believe.
Yes, and he's the heir to the throne. Cardan and Jude are obviously High King, High Queen. He is the heir, and he doesn't want to rule.
He never has.
He
Even
never has.
In the first books, I will give Holly that. That's the one thing we definitely got from the get-go was Oak doesn't want to be the king.
Yeah, he's just kind of a pawn. He got used in the first trilogy in order to crown Cardan, without Cardan knowing that was the plan. He was just a pawn in Jude's scheme. And then he gets sent to live in the mortal world so that he can have a normal childhood from seven until he's of age to rule without a regent. So he goes back to court. He goes back to fairyland. But it's not like they give him the throne right away. They don't abdicate for him. They're like, when we die, you get the throne. But they're all immortal anyway, so he's like, whatever. I'm not going to rule.
Right.
I'm just going to play court games.
They're all immortal except for Jude,
which we will get to later.
Mm-hmm.
So he's just kind of playing around, playing courtier all the time.
Yep.
And unlike Cardan, who's very charming but has bite to him,
Oak's just a nice gentleman.
He's just charming and he's not mean.
Yeah. Cardan is very underhanded with the way that he speaks. Like, as we talked about in our last episode, him using the fact that fairies can't lie to just really give a nice backhanded compliment.
So, like, stellar.
Telling Jude, have I told you how hideous you look today? And then saying, oh, well, I actually can't.
He can't just say, you look pretty. And those little twists
he's a
make
little
it
trickster but he's well intentioned, whereas Oak, we're led to believe, is kind of the opposite, where he has a nice way with words, he's very kind, but he's got some sort of scheme going on in the background.
Right. And so there's always this thing of he can't lie, so when he says things that are nice and charming, like, he does believe that he's telling the truth, but people think he might have ulterior motives because he has this magic where he can channel, like, what people want to hear and tell them what they want to get them to, like, do things for him. Not in a, like, compulsion way, the way that we find out Surin has command over Lady Nor, who rules the Court of Teeth, which is her kingdom, or the way Jude had command over Cardan. But it's just this, like, way of getting in people's head and making them love you because you're giving them the conversation, the words, the validation, whatever it is that you need. And so people don't trust him because they think that he's got some sort of ulterior motive at all times, which, to be honest, he really doesn't. He's just a nice dude. He's just so nice.
So Oak is also the child of he has the same mother as Locke. I forget her name. Liriope or something. Liriope or whatever. And Dane, Prince Dane, who was murdered in the first Cruel Prince book. They think inherited this
from his mom
quality that Liriope had and that Locke seemed to have, of kind of like the voice in Dune, if you've seen the movie or read the book, the Ben Gesserit voice, where they can, or like Jedi mind trick voice, where you can just kind of say something in this tone that magically compels people, or like a vampire even. It's a very common fantasy trope of having this, like, ability to really convince someone to do what you want to do, like a compulsory magic.
And with Oak, he's not even choosing his own words. The magic flows through him, and the words that the person wants to hear on the other end of the conversation, he speaks them, but he's not really in control of what he's saying.
Right.
And there are a lot of unforeseen consequences that can come out of the things that he can charm out of people. And it's made very clear that he needs to be a little bit wary of using his charm, because it's kind of like manifesting and not being specific enough. If you just say like, I want something simple to happen, there could be so many ways that is interpreted.
Yeah.
And so many ways it can come about. You have to be like so prescriptive.
Yeah, like when you make a wish on a genie, or like everything in this fairy world, when you make a bargain with them, you have to be so specific with your terminology and your words, because that's the whole premise of fairies can't lie, so they use the art of deception. And Oak was raised in this family that's very adept at deception, with, you know, Jude being a master liar, but she's immortal, so she can lie.
That's her like shining quality.
Exactly. Carden is the master of words and
evasive language,
twisting evasive language. Then there's, you know, Madoc, who's just a schemer in general. And yeah, I mean, he's just been around this tendency to really be careful with crafting your words to get what you want his whole life.
And I think that's one of Holly Black's like shining qualities is her language and her word choice in her dialogue, and even in the internal monologues that you have with her characters, is so clever, because she's like threading the inability to lie for most of the characters, the desire to scheme and deceive, like all of these elements like cross hairs, and her language is so specific, and it's not like overly done. It's concise and to the point, but it's really, really well done, executed.
I think that's one of, agreed. Holly Black is a master, just like her characters, of word choice and sentence composition that keeps it reads very fast, because her sentences are not, they're not run-ons, they're not overly complex. She doesn't use a lot of prescriptive or descriptive language at all, really. Like her characters' appearances and the appearance of all of the environments are not overly described whatsoever. She'll maybe toss one or two sentences in there, but it's really like the prose drives the conversations forward and the plot forward, and her dialogue is excellent because of her ability to craft words. She's a master of crafting prose that moves. So I give Holly Black her flowers for that, for sure.
Okay, so that's Oak.
That's Oak. Moving into Ren, our other main character, Surin, the child queen of the Court of Teeth in the north. In The Cruel Prince, she was kind of Lady Nor and Lord Gerald, however you want to pronounce those.
I'm aligned.
Okay, cool. They
Approved.
are presiding rulers over the Court of Teeth in the first trilogy, but I guess Surin is this child queen, like they're basically her regents, I guess.
Yeah.
This part lost me a little. Not super explained well how the royal hierarchy structure of the lower courts works, especially the Court of Teeth in this instance. We're led to believe in the first book that Surin is the daughter of Lady Nor and Lord Gerald.
Yes.
We come to learn that is in fact not true. They couldn't conceive. So
she's a creation made at their
Frankenstein's
behest.
monster. She was crafted from ice and snow
and like sticks.
And just like, random natural elements by Bogdana, who is the storm hag.
Guys, there are so many hags.
Goddamn hags in this book.
So many hags.
What does that even mean?
What is a hag?
They're just like old crusty witches, I guess.
Like, it's so unserious.
And again, not described at all. No description of what we're expecting these people to look like. I don't know if she's wearing rags. I don't know if she's got a crooked ass nose. I'm just picturing her kind of the same way that I pictured like the Weaver in ACOTAR.
Yeah.
Just like a crusty old decrepit gremlin
with a lot of power.
Or like, oh my gosh, what's that other character? There's a Disney character that I'm picturing and I can't put my finger on it.
Just every Disney witch.
It's the witch from Snow White.
Yeah. But we don't get any of that description, so that's just
my brainchild. That's my headcanon. That's my truth, and you can take it or leave it.
Yeah. So you got this like powerful hag who creates this girl for Lady Nor and Lord Gerald. And that's Surin. But she's like a child queen, and everything about their setup is what Jude was trying to avoid with Oak and Maddox potentially taking the throne as Oak's regent. And so it's the reason that she made sure Cardan had to sit on the throne while Oak grew up, so that Oak would not end up being this like puppet king with someone else calling the shots, but like just being the figurehead. And so we see like flashbacks of Ren's time in the Court of Teeth when she's with Lady Nor and Lord Gerald, and how she was like really not well treated, and she was constantly scared, and they were very mean to her and they hurt her, and she's bridled in this like magical creation that means she has to follow the commands of the people that are in charge of the bridal, which are Lady Nor and Lord Gerald, even though technically she should have command over them.
So they're like very abusive of her, and eventually well, first of all, in the first trilogy, she's presented by them as like a bride promised to Oak, even though they're both 7 years old.
7!
Just to like secure the future of the Court of Teeth, I guess.
Yeah, and like as a treaty thing, like let's be partners in like politics. Have a bride.
Sure. And so
and Vivi's like, don't let
this creepy ass little girl like don't let my brother near her.
Yeah. And like Ren is like a little butthurt by that, which like, okay, fair, but also she is like a feral girl bridled.
Right. So there's that. And eventually she does escape from the Court of Teeth, and she gets rescued by a mortal family.
Her unfamily, we love.
Which she calls her unfamily eventually after she leaves them again.
She was like with the mortal unfamily and then taken back by Lord Gerald and Lady Nor for a couple years and bridled, and that's when the Cruel Prince happens. And then she escapes, and she doesn't necessarily go back to live with them because she's convinced that they're scared of her, and like now that they know she's not mortal and not even like just like a sickly girl, like she's actually this blue-haired girl.
The unfamily was compelled while she was taken away to be like, oh my god, you're so scary, like who are me?
Yeah. So when she escapes the Court of Teeth, she goes back to the mortal world, but she's just like living in the woods, and she keeps an eye on her unfamily, and she's like attached to them, and that ends up being used as leverage against her later. But she's just literally feral girl surviving in the woods, wearing rags and no shoes.
Yeah, it's dark for her.
Her entire personality is just survival mode in the woods.
Exactly.
That's honestly her entire personality, the entire book of the Stolen Heir, if we're being honest.
Yeah. I have words for this, but we can get into it as we meander through the plot. So let's get into the what, because there really are no other like majorly substantial characters besides Oak and Ren that we can't touch on it within one sentence. So moving into the what. So as mentioned, this takes place 10 years after the events of the Cruel Prince. Oak is now 17. Surin is 17
Probably
or 18. I think she's like a year older than him.
An older woman.
Does not matter at all. And Oak is on this quest to break Madoc out of his exile, or break him out of prison. He's like in jail in the Court of Teeth, I guess.
Yeah, somehow he ended up there.
Yeah, he like,
it was probably explained, I just don't remember.
Yeah,
slightly inconsequential.
Literally does not matter. So he's stuck in the Court of Teeth. Oak needs to get him out, and he thinks that Ren is the key to do that because she is the queen, so she can technically tell Lady Nor what to do. And Oak has the bridle now. Yes,
because at the very end of Queen of Nothing, Jude basically forces Lady Nor to unbridle Surin and swear fealty to her, and voluntarily, but not voluntarily because Jude is making her do it, put herself, Lady Nor, under Ren's command. So Ren's out here like just living off the land. And Oak is like, if I'm gonna succeed, I need the girl who can literally compel Lady Nor to do anything. So he traipses his way through the forest
into the mortal world, through the forest of swirling, twirling gumdrops.
Yes,
like in Elfhame.
At the encouragement of yet another hag, Mother Marrow. She's like,
go find Ren and then go find the Thistle Witch. Sure. So three key hags here.
Yeah.
We have Mother Marrow, who lives in Elfhame. We have the Thistle Witch, who lives in this
Court of Moths.
Mandrake Market. Court of Moths? I don't remember which one.
Mother Marrow's in the
Mandrake Market.
Is in the Mandrake Market.
Thistle Witch
Is in the Court
Court
of
of
Moths.
Moths.
And then Bogdana, who's like freaking everywhere.
Bogdana
She's a
is
storm.
she's one with the air. And she's part of the Court of Teeth. She is the one who animated Ren, so she's technically like Ren's mother.
Creator of sorts.
Yeah. So
Oak's like, all right, let's go find Ren. Haven't seen her since since they were children. He's checked in on her like once or twice over the years, but it's been a hot minute.
he just decides that he's always had a crush on her, I guess. Like,
Yeah. All his courtier trysts aside, he's like, you know who I
Ren's
really
the
like,
one
though?
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ren.
Last time I saw her, we were children, but she's the one for me. And so Holly Black really runs with that. And we spend the entirety until the last like 30 pages of The Stolen Heir just following Oak and Ren and a couple of side character soldiers who are having a little spat of their own. Tristan, who's Oak's bodyguard, and Hyacinth, who's like one of Madoc's soldiers that was turned into a falcon, who is bridled and was formerly Tristan's lover. We just follow them meandering around, trying to get to the Court of Teeth and like find this thing.
One thing that Lady Nor says she will accept to trade for Madoc, and that is
Melith's heart.
Melith's heart. And Melith and Mab are like two of the lore of Elfhame starts with them.
With Mab. Mab is like the originator of the Greenbrier line.
Mm-hmm.
She's like the creator of Elfhame.
She's like OG queen.
Yeah, and she's the one that was buried under the palace and whose bones went missing at the end of the beginning of the Cruel Prince, or the end of Queen of Nothing.
Right. So you've got Mab, and then Melith's heart is this second relic that kind of goes with the bones. Like the bones have the power to make things, and then apparently Melith's heart has the power to unmake. So it's yin yang, light, dark, all that good stuff.
Classic.
And so Lady Nor has some of the bones because she stole them last time we saw her in the Court of Teeth, in the palace. She stole some of the bones with big explosion, took some bones, hightailed it back to the Court of Teeth. And now we're like, ooh, she wants Melith's heart, and she's like, I bet Oak knows where to get it. Let me ask him to trade it for his daddy. We go to the Thistle Witch to ask her where it is, and she's like, you know where it is.
We're like,
thanks.
Okay. And then Oak is like, oh, well, actually, I just need this box that looks like it's the box that Melith's heart comes in, and I'm just going to put a deer heart in there.
And I'm going to trick her.
I'm going to trick her, and
it'll be
everyone's
fine.
like, but you can't lie, sir. So how's that going to work? And he's like, don't worry, just trust me. I got this.
Yeah. He's like, don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it, sweetheart.
And so, I mean, the plot of the book until we get to the Court of Teeth is just them walking through trees.
Whole time also, it's just Ren's POV, and
it's first person Ren's POV that entire book. And while Oak has this boon of like trying to get his dad out of jail, and he's got this whole quest, and he needs Ren to make it more likely to be successful, like, what is Ren really getting out of it? Like, so she gets revenge on Lady Nor, but she was just living her happy little, like, woodland fairy life before this. Like, her motivation is really not as strong as Oak's, and yet we only get that story, like, the first entire book from her POV.
Yeah, it fell a little flat for me okay, I'll be honest, it fell a lot flat for me in the first book. I think mostly because we were stuck in Ren's head, but a lot of I don't think Holly Black really did a good job capitalizing on the fact that we're in Ren's head and had her thoughts in front of us, because the whole time a lot of the stuff that goes on and the stuff that she reacts to and her character is implied rather than explained or shown. And it leaves a lot of the events of the book and a lot of the emotional tension like flat and not believable. It doesn't feel tangible because we don't really understand what Ren has gone through. Like, it's kind of told to us but not shown. Like, we know that she has an abusive past, but we don't feel it because she's no longer reactive to it because she's been in the woods just chilling for so long. Yeah. And I think it's just not as impactful as intended.
Yeah, she's in survival mode when we meet her, and she is kind of this like shell of a character, and she remains very much this shell for about 85% of the book.
Yeah, so she's not trusting of Oak, has no real discernible personality or character traits for the majority of the book, and has no motivation
to be on this quest.
And
her mistrust of Oak is repeatedly mentioned as being due to the fact that when they were 7 and this whole like negotiation of them getting married and betrothed at 7 was put on the table, and it was obviously turned down. She had to go back to the Court of Teeth, and she blames Oak for not trying harder to
again 7 years old
from having to go back home with her abusive mom and dad. And Oak had come to save her and like break her out of their camp once so she could hide under his bed while the big battle was happening. Cute, whatever. And like they played games while everyone was busy chopping off heads. But then she was like, he let me go back with my mean mommy and daddy. Bro, what? He didn't know. He didn't know that your life was that bad.
Was 7.
Also that part.
Like, what did you expect, girly pop? Genuinely. What's he gonna do?
And she never brings it up. This is the other thing, is I get that avoidance drags things out and allows more plot to happen. Like, if you don't hit the
whole time, even through the prisoner's throne, never mentions it.
They just never talk about it.
They never talk about this, like, event that seems to be, in her head, so defining of her mistrust of this character. So we just literally don't, there's no resolution. It just, like, the tension never gets dissipated, and the tension's not even really believable to begin with.
Yeah.
So it just falls flat for me, and I'm gonna refer to a quote that sticks with me from a screenwriting class that I took in college, that the foundation of a compelling story is about a person who wants something very badly and is having trouble getting it. And here we are in the head, the first person perspective of Ren, a person, sure, sort of, who doesn't really seem to want anything at all except to, like, not be abused and have her unfamily be left alone. And as a result of not wanting anything, she's not really having a hard time getting anything.
Yeah.
The only person with a motivation here is Oak. And she doesn't, it just doesn't make sense. There's nothing emotionally driving the plot forward.
Yeah.
And I think it fails in that way.
I think it's a missed opportunity to have had Oak's POV in the first book, because he's the one who wants something really badly, and yet we only get that entire quest told from the perspective, first person, with Ren, who is just kind of his accessory to this quest. And then when we get to the prisoner's throne, we switch to Oak's POV, but it's in third person. So like she could have done third person in the first book and given us some of Oak's POV with Ren.
I would love to hear Holly Black's intention for why the perspectives were the way they were, because I just feel like there was several more compelling methods and angles that she could have taken from this. We could have had a first person Oak POV in the first book, and it would have been so much better, just because
he had more going on.
And we would actually have seen the character journey with Oak that we went on in the Prisoner's Throne when it was from his POV in third person, which I thought was so much insanely better. Like, first of all, so much more action, so much more stuff happened in the Prisoner's Throne. Like, Stolen Heir was truly all set up. But also, getting to see the flashback scenes in the Prisoner's Throne from Oak's POV made his character so much more substantial.
Yes.
Because in the first book, all we have was the memory of him from when he was 7. And this like assumption that he's a charmer. And that's all we really get. There's no real substance to Oak. He's just like has a way with words, and that's it.
Yeah. And then in the prologue of The Prisoner's Throne, you start to see how he's using his charm to actually navigate political conspiracies and like do something with it rather than just sitting on his ass and be charming. And you're like, okay, he's actually got goals, trajectories, strategy, whatever it is, and it gives him a little bit more depth. It makes him more three-dimensional.
Yeah, I think he's very 2D in the first book in the duology.
But he's also the only one with a significant enough motivation to drive the plot forward, and we don't get to hear any of that from his point of view. And then in the second book, in Prisoner's Throne, I feel like we missed out on some stuff with Ren. Like, she clearly is like not having a good time for a lot of it, and Oak has to like puzzle it out all on his own. And look, maybe we'll get some novellas of Ren's POV during that plot of The Prisoner's Throne, like a simultaneous companion novella. But I just think both of them would have been...
They were both from the wrong perspective, I think. Like, I enjoyed Oak's POV in Prisoner's Throne, but I think that was aided by the fact that there just was more going on because we'd set up for, like, the dominoes to fall. If they had switched POVs and we had Oak in Stolen Heir and Ren in Prisoner's Throne, I think the duology as a whole would have been so much punchier. And I will second that comment by saying, even if the perspectives were to stay as they are, first of all, the change from first to third person was unexpected and jarring.
That drives me up the wall. And
there was no explanation for why that happened.
This happens, and like even when it happens with other authors too, like for example, when you finish the ACOTAR trilogy and you leave Feyre's first person POV and then enter third person POV, like why?
Yeah, I mean,
there is a why, but like it drives me up the wall.
I complained less about because I just, personally, I prefer third person POV. I think there's just more flexibility with bouncing between different characters and like having a more bird's eye view on them. And there are places where a first person POV is effective and where a switch is effective. I'm doing that in my own book, which I won't say more, but there is a planned perspective switch that has a very substantial purpose in the plot. And I totally get it when there's a purpose, but when it feels purposeless like this, I just don't understand why jar the reader that way when we're so used to whatever. Anyway,
so especially because at the end of Stolen Heir, there's this big reveal about Ren and her creation and who she is, really. And here's the big reveal that I guessed from a mile away.
And 18 miles away.
18 miles, yeah. And it is that the reason Ren has like conscious thought and like sentience when she's just a creation of snow and whatever is because versus the stick creatures that Lady Nor is using the bones to create that are just under her command and like it's just lights on, nobody's home. The reason that she's her own person is because she has Melith's heart in her. So when Oak shows up and it's like, I have Melith's heart, he knows that Ren is Melith incarnate.
And he kept it from her and blah, blah, blah. But like, it was so spectacularly easy to spot coming.
So we have this very flat Ren character throughout the entire first novel up until this ending. And then the ending is when she is brought into the loop of who she is and what is contained within her chest. And she goes batshit crazy. And like her personality and the things that she does, just like she makes a full 180. And it was a very, very jarring.
It did not work for me at all. And like we were talking about it and we were like, okay, like she gets Melith's memories when she has this realization when she uses the magic for the first time.
Yeah, it all like unlocks, I guess.
We don't get to, even though we're in her head,
We don't know
She doesn't tell us that at all.
Until the prisoner's throne. We're in Oak's POV when we find out that Ren is now being flooded with Melith's memories. And that makes sense why she went batshit crazy if that's what happened. But we don't get that information when we're in Ren's head in the Stolen Heir. We don't get that until later, and Oak has to tell us that. Which is why I think it would have been so much more impactful to understand like what's going on with Ren if we had gotten some of the prisoner's throne, if not all of it, from her perspective, because she's the one who is now grappling with something big.
Yeah.
Right? Oak had this big quest he was going on in the first book, and now Ren is trying to reconcile the consequences of said quest in the second book. But the POVs are all wrong for that.
Yeah, it was disappointing in that way. And I, again, would be so curious to see what Holly's plan was when crafting these stories and why she made those choices, because to both of us it just seemed very obvious that the perspectives were not correct for both of these books. And like the story itself was fine. Especially in The Prisoner's Throne, which I enjoyed tremendously more than The Stolen Heir, which I felt to be a snooze fest and a slog at times.
Yeah, to Natalie's point, Stolen Heir felt like set up. It felt like the Wicked
could have
King
been
to
one
the Queen
book.
of Nothing.
It really, truly could have all been in one book. If we kept it the way that it was. It could stay as two books if we got the perspectives swapped and we had more emotional tension to work with. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, that was not the decision that Holly Black made. And here we are giving our 2 cents on why that was a mistake.
Yeah. And hey, we'll live with it. The Prisoner's Throne moved. It
moved way faster than Stolen Heir. Not a ton was going on in Stolen Heir. It was mostly just like Ren brooding and deciding whether or not to trust Oak and
not
going back and forth
him
on it, and
the
not
whole
trusting
time, really.
Yeah.
And by the very end, throwing Oak in prison
and having this complete character 180
yeah.
out of absolutely nowhere. And it was very bizarre to me. Like, as much as we attributed Jude to be like a Nesta character in Cruel Prince, I think the intention was for Ren to be a Nesta-like character in this series, and once she had the magic, she certainly was. But the difference was Nesta was an unapologetic cunt the entire time throughout ACOTAR, and even before she got dipped into the cauldron and given her power, she was an evil, nasty bitch. And so we knew to expect that from her. Ren was not an evil, nasty bitch at all until the power awakened in her.
Right,
and it was completely unexplained.
And like, was Melith an evil, nasty bitch?
We don't know. We literally do not know. So I'm hoping that maybe we'll get like a Melith novella. We could get a concurrent
prequel
events.
series of Mab and Melith and Bogdana like having family drama.
Mm-hmm. A hag fest. Or I was saying to Claudia, like, I feel like there's been a lot of unexplored tertiary content from Cruel Prince that we could have gotten instead of this, because in the first trilogy, these two characters, because they were children and they were basically used by Jude and Cardan and Lady Nor and Lord Jarl as bartering chips, it was like these two characters were less of characters and more of just a plot device.
Yeah.
And
they were pawns.
And they weren't well developed enough in the beginning, but it was implied at the beginning of these books that they were.
Right.
So
that we should be invested
just a disconnect
automatically.
Between like, we're just thinking, oh, these are 7-year-olds whose, hand in marriage is being traded around as part of a greater scheme, but we don't actually get to know them as characters at all. And Holly, like, sort of, I guess, implies that we understand who they are, and we literally do not at all. There should have either been a novella of their, like, lives growing up a little bit, or just something. I just don't think there was enough in these characters yet to write a successful story based off of them. And two characters that did get plenty of development in the Cruel Prince trilogy that we haven't explored further really were Taryn and the Ghost.
Yeah.
Who were implied to have had a secret romance. I want that book.
Yeah.
I want the Taryn and Ghost book.
Yeah. Which, I mean, the Ghost is now a tree.
The Ghost was turned into a tree.
And to save him from dying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's unfinished business there because Carden, this was so funny. Carden's like concentrating really hard and like the Ghost is out here. His
gave
body.
Me Sam Cortland.
Yes. He's out here like slowly shutting down. Like all systems are like powering off. And Carden is like furrowing his brow and is like, hold on, I'm concentrating. And then he does some sort of magic. His like weird like earth magic.
It was so
and
funny.
The Ghost turns into a tree. And Jude is like, what the hell? He's like, I don't know. A tree.
So you turned my boyfriend into a tree?
A tree. So there's unfinished business there. Carden needs to go to magic school and learn how to figure his shit out.
For real.
And Tara needs to get her tree back.
In order to get her tree back, I feel like Carden needs to go to the University of Hags and get a degree. This man does not know how to do anything.
He's like, I'm High King. I have the power of the land at my disposal.
Oh my god, there were scenes with him playing with his nephew, Terrence, and Locke's son. I died.
Leander.
It was so cute.
That was, yeah. I think like the only thing that gives me baby fever, honestly, is fictional men dealing with young kids.
The way that The Prisoner's Throne left off was Jude and Carden are like, okay, Oak, we get that you don't want to be High King, so we're going to let you abdicate your role as our heir, but you need to stay in it for a couple more months because we need to go to the Undersea and deal with the Nicasia, who's now the queen of the Undersea.
Yeah, so basically Nicasia is about to have like the bachelorette of the Undersea, right? So she's about to have all these dudes, fairies, whatever, show up and offer her their hand in marriage, and she's gonna go through and like, I don't know, hand out shells. And
electric.
Eventually like pick a husband. And so Carden is like, you can abdicate, but not until we're back because we got to go spend some time in the Undersea and try not to die. So it's honestly giving
It's giving more
Jude and
books,
Carden, more
which,
Jude and Carden.
Thank God. I think Holly heard our pleas and was like, all right, we're done with Oak and Ren. Time to go back to the OGs.
I think everyone was really excited when we realized that Prisoner's Throne was going to bring us back to Jude and Carden and bring them into the fold of characters. We love them. We love them so much. And I think that this is a nice setup, the end of the Prisoner's Throne, to potentially give us either a standalone or another duology, trilogy, whatever, about now Jude and Carden. And the other thing, Oak mentions in passing, obviously Jude and Taryn are twins, and he mentions at one point that Jude looks like she is aging slower than Taryn. And he chalks it up to like, maybe Taryn's just tired because she's got a kid and she's a mom and like that shit's exhausting. Fair? Totally valid. Could just be that.
And we know that humans don't age when they're in fairyland. Like if you stay there, you're not going to age like physically at all. But if you go back to the mortal world, your age will catch up with you. So like you could stay in fairyland for hundreds of years and be fine, unless you get murdered, of course. And then return to the mortal world and like perish immediately.
Right. And so the question remains of like, what is Jude doing to maintain immortality? And like, is there some sort of magic like due to her having married Carden?
Oh, also we get that Jude is taking birth control, so
that too. But we know that when she married Carden, she got some of his magic, like the land responds to her as well, which we saw when she like healed herself with the land after getting essentially impaled. Anyway, maybe there's something about Carden being a fairy that is now translating over to Jude because they are married and tied together in this like fairy bond of marriage, which is very intense. So who knows? Like it's an unanswered question, and this goes for a lot of fantasy series where you have humans, mortals, and then fairies. When you have a couple where there's one of each, the question always remains of like, okay, how is this one who's immortal gonna like deal with having a partner who's gonna live for a few decades and that's it? And it's a smart setup for spin-offs, additional content to like pull the threads of side characters, secondary characters, and couples that you've created investment with for the readers, but haven't fully fleshed out. So you like leave us with this what could happen. Really know what the deal is with Jude, and Oak constantly says there's no way I'm going to outlive Carden and Jude. And it's like, okay, but like what if someone shoved Jude back into human land in 8 decades? Like she would poof cease to exist.
Yeah. So there's lots of setup for what's to come. We know that Jude is taking birth control, so if she stops taking birth control, they could conceive an heir,
have a kid.
They could also like name someone that's not in the Greenbrier line their heir if they wanted to.
Yeah, there are so many options.
They're in charge, so there's lots of options. There's lots of setup for an undersea bachelor story to come. Oak and Ren are now chilling in the ice citadel. They're gonna get married,
right?
Allegedly, after everything. Which we did not unpack the plot really at all of the Prisoner's Throne, but essentially it's Oak is in jail, breaks out of jail, and then in order to get out of the ice citadel, Elfhame comes to rescue him. But they sent a snake with a ring in it in advance. Also, Oak is immune to blusher mushroom because
very key plot element.
Which is really a crutch throughout the story.
Blusher mushroom is a
blusher
poison.
Mushroom is like the arch enemy number 1 in this book.
It is what the ghost is slowly dying of before he becomes a tree.
Yeah.
It's the poison that slows your body.
And it's the poison that was used.
That Dane used on Oak's mother.
Well, that Dane hired the ghost to use.
Yes, so fair. And so Oak
has blusher mushroom in his blood, so it can't kill him. He's
like affected by it, but it's
to
not
a much
as
lesser
intense.
Degree.
Yeah, so he can withstand a dosage that would otherwise kill someone.
Correct. So essentially, like, Elfhame comes, there's this big standoff, and then
they bring the whole army.
Yeah.
Jude
entire army
shows up to get her little brother. In a way she did not show up to get her dad. Didn't do any of that for Madoc.
Not at all. So we get Madoc out, and then also the army comes to get Oak freed, and then Oak does some word trickery, and
he's just
says
very
he's gonna
non-confrontational.
Exactly.
He like doesn't want there to be a battle.
So he says he's gonna marry Ren, or he said that he's announcing their engagement. He like secretly slips the ring on her finger, and then she just goes along with it because she doesn't want a battle either.
And we find out too that she's like Bogdana is holding her unsister hostage and using that as leverage to get Ren to do what she wants. And she does want Ren to marry Oak because she wants revenge on the Greenbrier line for everything that they did when Mab came into power and the way they tricked her into killing her own daughter, blah blah blah. And she just wants Ren to have power because if Ren has power, she has power.
Correct. Yeah, so essentially they get engaged to avoid a major conflict. Then they travel across the sea. They get attacked by the undersea because some shit's going down there.
There were
ends up
tentacles
being
involved.
Completely inconsequential.
I don't know.
Then they get to Elfhame, and then there's like this big feast, and lots of magical shit ensues.
But that's when we get back to Jude and Carden, which I texted Natalie. I was like, oh my God,
Thank
we're
God.
home. We're home.
Mommy and Daddy are here to rescue us. And then Oak gets back to his conspiring. He's like trying to unravel this conspiracy with this woman. Ren admits her feelings for him and vice versa. And they have a moment in the garden,
which honestly tracks for Ren, who has spent years living in the woods.
True.
It's where she's comfortable.
Ren discovers that he's conspiring, I guess, and she's also under the compulsion of Bogdana, and there's a bunch of random secret stuff happening behind the scenes,
and Oak just figures it out. He's like, you can't talk about it, but this is what it is. And we're like, oh. And that's why I think we missed out a little bit on being inside of Ren's head, because she was struggling because she couldn't reveal certain things because she was charmed not to. So Oak has this whole realization about how Ren is being used by Bogdana, and then he ends up getting stuffed into an acorn at one point.
From there, there's another standoff moment, and there's a moment where the big enemy who has about 4 lines of dialogue in the entire book is revealed. It's like Holly was like eeny, meeny,
Randallin.
miny, mo, and just picked a random side character.
Yeah, Randallin, who's like one of the council members who consults like for Jude and Carden, and he's just like a pompous asshole half the time that we are in a scene with him. And he wanted power. He just like still doesn't like the fact that Jude is a mortal girly. Like, sir, get over yourself.
Yeah, it's
the stupidest reason for not liking who's
dumb.
on the crown or who's on the throne.
But then he stabs Carden, and then
that was a personal attack on us.
That's my High King.
That is my
Be careful how
High
you
King.
talk to my High King, okay?
And Carden's over here just like, well, this hurts. There's a moment where Oak is in Carden and Jude's bedroom. Like, they don't know he's there. He was like looking for something, snooping. It's in one of the flashbacks. And he hears like the door start to turn, so he hides. And they walk in, and he overhears Jude and Carden talking. And Carden tells Jude, "You're kind of terrifying." And Jude just goes, yeah, I think that's kind of maybe what you like about me. And he just goes, "Oh, I adore it." Like, this is what we love about Holly, is like this kind of banter and like this play with language where
and we don't get it from Oak and Ren. I mean, Oak has he has a clever way with words. The one thing I liked about Oak is his dialogue. Like, I enjoyed the way that he spoke.
Anyway, so Carden's hurt.
And
he's being funny about it. At the very end,
I mean, Ghost gets turned into a tree. Ren like unmakes a bunch of stuff and almost dies.
And then she goes back to the Court of Teeth and rebuilds.
Yeah.
She rebuilds everything.
Oh yeah, she like takes Bogdana down by like absorbing her storm or whatever. Because Bogdana
goes
is
into,
like,
oh yeah, you're right. Okay, so she goes into a coma. She absorbs Bogdana's power. So what happens to Bogdana is similar to like when Amarin gets unleashed, I guess, in Wings and Ruin, where like all of her power gets sucked out of her, but she's still like the shell of her being. Like her physical corporeal body still exists. So Ren sucks Bogdana's power, and then that sends her into like reboot mode. And so she is in this coma. Somehow I think it's like Oak giving her a forehead kiss that brings her out of the coma.
Oh, he like professes his love to her, but then
that does nothing. Nothing.
It doesn't do any. Well, she wakes up, but she didn't hear any of it.
Right. But he does something after that like brings her out of the coma. And then he's like, "How do you not know that I love you?" "Oh, right. You were asleep." And she ends up kind of leaving him.
She's like, "I've done too much to you already." And we're like, okay.
So she goes back to the Court of Teeth, and Oak is just like, I miss that.
And then
You're like, miss what?
Literally, like, what? First of all, also, what's he getting from her the whole time? Because all she does is be like, I don't believe you. I'm not into it.
And she's also like, I'm a little dangerous. And he's like,
also she like awakens and has wings.
Oh yeah, slay. Good for her.
Yeah, I'm jealous.
As she should.
But yeah, that is how the book ends. We have Carden and Jude prepping to go to the Undersea. We have Oak and Ren back in the Ice Citadel. And that's it.
Yeah. And so now that Ren has Bogdana's power, I think the whole point of that was Melith's heart has the power to unmake things, and when she used her magic, it would disintegrate her as a being as well. And it was very hard for her to recoup that, but now that she's got Bogdana's power, she has like the balance that allows her to not disintegrate every time she uses a little bit of her magic.
She's got the juice and the squeeze.
Exactly. And that's when Oka goes back and is like, remember that whole marriage thing that we proposed when we were 7?
Should do that.
And then we like pretended to do a few months ago? Like, maybe we should actually do it. And
she's like, word.
She's like, cool.
And that's it, guys. That is the end of the book. That is the end of the duology. I gave the Stolen Heir a 2-star review on Goodreads just because nothing happened at all and the characters really were a letdown for me. But I enjoy Holly Black's dialogue and prose, so it gets 2 stars back for that. And I gave The Prisoner's Throne a 4, which is honestly a very good rating for me. I enjoyed it a lot more because we were out of Ren's very bland shell-like POV and got a lot more action. Still left a little bit to be desired on, you know, the character development romance front, as we've been saying all along, but I enjoyed it much more. It moved a lot faster. The action was a lot more enjoyable. But overall, I would say this duology fell short of par for me in comparison to The Cruel Prince. And just in general, it wasn't all that. Like, it's probably not a good sign when you're looking forward to reading a duology about spin-off characters just because they mention the characters from the original. That's usually a bad sign. So,
yeah, I think it was nice to be in Holly Black's writing style again. Like Natalie mentioned, I enjoy her prose. I enjoy her the quippiness of her sentences. Like, it moves because the prose is not super complicated, and so you can crank through it pretty quickly, as I did last night in preparation for this. But I'm more invested in Jude and Carden.
Mm-hmm.
And with the trilogy, it was the Wicked King felt a little bit like a plateau set up for Queen of Nothing, but you're coming off of The Cruel Prince and you know that there's still a book to go. So it was a little bit more well balanced because you're fully invested after book 1. Book 2 is a little bit more steady state, and it's just political intrigue, which sometimes gets a little bit stagnant or a little bit boring. But then book 3 had a whole bunch of magic going on. So you're invested already, and so by the time you hit the Wicked King, you're like, okay, I'm just cruising down the highway. Like, I'm not hitting the gas, but I'm not hitting the brakes. We're just kind of on cruise control. But you're okay because you've already gone 0 to 60. Mm-hmm. And then, like, you stay at 60 for a while, you hit book 3, then you go 60 to 100. Here in the Stolen Heir, it felt a little bit like we were inching our way from 0 to 60, like,
and then
in rush hour
dropped
traffic.
A brick on the gas pedal in the last 30 pages.
Yeah, right. You're like stop, start, standstill traffic on the 405 at rush hour, and then
and then you get past the crash, and all of a sudden it's like 80.
Exactly, and then you're like bombing down at like 90 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So the pace felt a little bit off kilter.
Agreed completely. All right, gang. Do we have any final thoughts? I feel like we've said what needed to be said.
Let's leave this to God's internet now.
Yeah, God's internet, it's now in your hands. If you've read these books, which I hope you have if you listen to this, because we didn't do a ton of explaining, leave us a comment, send us an email. Let us know what you thought, because I'm curious if the general populace is sharing our dismay about this duology. Stay tuned for our ACOTAR episode coming at the end of March.
And there will be more ACOTAR content. I will say this is like going to be one of many. So come back for a little bit of ACOTAR. And in the meantime, like, if you haven't read some of Holly Black's other books, if you haven't read Book of Night, which we talked about last time, like, go and give that a try, see what you think. And hopefully you've made it through these 2 and have some thoughts you want to share with us. Go find us on Instagram, drop us a couple DMs, or comments and all that fun stuff. And, like, let's have, like, nice general discourse and not talk about feudal fantasy.
Feudal fantasy is canceled. Okay, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Peace out, Girl Scout.